So Lenin believed that Lenin, who brought about the revolution in Russia, right? So it was not a capitalist country, but he made, the Bolsheviks took over. There was actually a previous revolution, the Mensheviks, but the Bolsheviks were able to take over, get rid of the Mensheviks, and take over, take control. So he believed communists should be ready to resort to any trick, ruse, or illegal method in order to advance the revolutionary objectives. He said, a lie told often enough becomes the truth. So, Satan is the father of lies. So, of course, communism uses that technique. And he spoke about creating the revolutionary vanguard. So he really insisted that there be a iron discipline inside the family, inside the party, absolute secrecy, work on two levels. One is the legal and parliamentary level, which is what the public sees, and then privately work illegally and subversively underground methods. Prepare for the moment to seize power, especially when the ruling class is in a state of government crisis. So he wrote about this in 1920. So actually, I just want to mention one thing. Don't you think it's a wonderful honor to be part of God's providence? I mean, if you think about it, God is really trusting us. And we know from True Father that the providence doesn't just happen because of what God wants. It's depending on what we do too. So that's a wonderful thing. And I just want to thank also the second king for trusting us and asking us to come here for this 21-day condition. I think it's a very meaningful condition. So as we were discussing yesterday, the core of communist teaching is hatred of religion. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels wrote, communism abolishes eternal truths, it abolishes all religion and all morality. That's what they want to do, okay? They cannot abolish eternal truth, but it's like an insect yelling at a human being, basically, but unfortunately they can deceive people. And then Lenin wrote in 1909, Marxism is materialism. As such, it is relentlessly hostile to religion. We must combat religion. That is the ABC of all materialism and consequently of Marxism. And it's actually very ironic, I think, because for people who believe that religion is so stupid and ridiculous, they seem to be afraid of it quite a bit. Think about it. If religion is such a drug and so, unscientific, why do they feel the need to attack it? Okay, so let's talk about the Bolshevik war on religion. After seizing power, their full throttle war on religion was underway as early as the spring of 1918. An open campaign of terror was launched against all religions, and particularly against the Russian Orthodox Church. In the summer of 1918, in the Yekaterinburg diocese, 47 clergymen were shot, drowned, or axed to death. So they really wanted to get rid of all the religious leaders and priests. And they also were very serious to indoctrinate children. So the Bolsheviks forbade religious instruction to anyone under 18 years of age. Children were encouraged to turn in their parents if they taught them about God. And we can see here the example of Pavel Trofimovich Morozov, better known as Pavlik. He was a Soviet youth praised by the Soviet press as a martyr. His story dated to 1932, when he was 14 years old. Is that as a 13-year-old boy who denounced his father to the authorities. He denounced his father as being a counter-revolutionary, and his father was taken away to a prison camp and to die. And then this boy was in turn killed by his own family. And this is a type of miserable suffering that communism brought to so many families, of turning the children against their own parents. And then let's talk about the war on churches. Of the 657 churches that exist in Moscow on the eve of 1917, the revolution, only 100 to 150 remained by 1976. Of those, only 46 still held services by the mid-1970s. Among those 46, few to none were free to say what they really wanted. They were monitored by full-time state-employed church watchers, whose job it was to report those who came to church to pray. So they destroyed most of the churches, and then even among the churches that still existed as more than just a museum, they have spies in every church watching who's coming to pray and worship, and reporting, keeping a list. And even the so-called priest who is teaching there is not really free to teach true Christianity. The communists preferred corrupt clergy that they could control. So in 1913, Lenin wrote a letter, and in the letter he wrote, "The Catholic priest corrupting young girls is much less dangerous, for it's easy to expose, condemn, expel the corrupted priest, while the holy priest cannot be expelled so simply. To expose the righteous priest is 1,000 times more difficult." So they're not afraid of corrupt clergy, they're afraid of righteous, true Christians. That is who they want to stamp out. Now, I want to talk about Soviet science and agriculture. So the Marxist teaching is that the material conditions determine human nature and development. They are materialists, right? So they found somebody named Trofim Lysenko to be in charge of agriculture for the whole nation. Now, why did they choose him? Well, he came from a poor peasant background, so it fit, their model of they want to get rid of the ruling class and anyone who's educated they're trying to create a new civilization based on communism, right? So they pick someone from the workers, the working class, the peasant class. And then he was a true believer in communism. Did he know anything about agriculture? No, he didn't. So he rejected the idea that plants and animals have stable characteristics encoded as genes, which are passed on. We all know about gene theory, right? Right? So in living things, we have genes with chromosomes which have DNA, right? And the DNA is the code, the software code that determines if something is a plant and with certain characteristics, or whether it's an animal, or whether it's a human being, right? But he did not believe in that. He saw those kinds of ideas as reactionary and anti-revolutionary. So he said only the environment shapes plants and animals. So he believed that we can remake plants and animals by putting them in the proper setting with the right stimulus. And by changing the environment, you can change those plants and animals and make them better and stronger and bigger and so on. Now, I do want to point out the environment can have an impact on how things grow and develop. I'm not denying that. But you need to do experiments to find out how things work. There is the internal nature, right? The code that ultimately God gave, right? But and there is epigenetics, which you can affect things and bring out certain features on the genes can be turned on and off through certain stimulus. So you remember when the second king had us all jump in ice water, right? Those kinds of external factors can stimulate certain, your immune system and so on, but it doesn't change your DNA, okay? So anyway, he was a good Marxist, so he said it doesn't really matter, I'm the brilliant Marxist, and all these people who've been farming for decades and hundreds of years, I don't care what they know, basically. Anyway, he promised that he would boost crop yields nationwide, all right? And he denounced Western bourgeois scientists and critics as tools of the imperialist oppressors. So scientists who said, were concerned about his methods, he said, you are counter-revolutionary. And so dissenters, there were Russian scientists in agriculture and so on, who were saying this is not a good idea, but they were denounced. They were sent to prisons or psychiatric hospitals. They were executed as enemies of the state. Think about this. These were scientists. These were people who had expertise. In the divine principle, we talk about mind-body unity. The mind by itself, without connection with the body, is quite dangerous, I believe. You might have certain ideas, but you need to test them and find out what really works. But the communists don't care about that, okay? They declare, we're going to have a 5-year plan, and we're going to, have this much growth. And in order to fulfill the goals of their 5-year plan, everyone lies, okay? And they said, we did more than our 5-year plan, okay? But it doesn't mean anything. The same thing in communist China. They report certain, they're lying right now about the coronavirus. They said, they had no coronavirus cases or deaths for several months, right? And America now is so-called the leading nation in the world with a number of coronavirus cases, because we in our country we try to be honest about people are testing positive and reported deaths. There are some problems in America, of course, because the hospitals get paid $39,000 if they report a COVID case. And they get paid much less if it's not a COVID case. So there's some bad incentives here too, unfortunately. But the communist countries are full of lies on every single level. It is truly, I have to give them credit. They get the prize, the world level prize for lies at every single level. So they deserve a medal for that. Okay. And the people who want to tell the truth are sent to prison camps or executed as enemies of the state. And that's what's going to happen if Joe Biden is elected in this country. Communists will be in our government. They will not pick people based on their expertise. They will pick people on external factors, skin color or other things. And if I were an African American, I would be so insulted. I would not want to be hired because of my skin color. I would want to be hired because I am excellent at what I do, right? There are brilliant African American scientists and intellectuals, economists. They're not great because they have black skin. They're excellent because they're smart and they work hard. Okay, that's the kind of culture that we want to have. Not based on, external factors. All right. So they so-called modernized Soviet agriculture by forcing millions to join collective state-run farms. Okay, so they got rid of the farmers who were successful, who they accused of being bourgeois, oppressors. They got rid of the people who knew how to do farming, and they gathered people and forced people to join the collective farms. Well, what do you think happened? It was not a good result. The crop yields. Let me read. I'll just read it to you. It said, 4 years later, after a 163-fold increase in farmland cultivated, so they increased the amount of farmland by 163 times. You would think you'd have a lot more food production. But with these methods, the food production was lower than before. It's an amazing thing. There were famine deaths, peaked in 1932-33. 7 million people starved to death. 7 million people. So you can see here, this is from the Chicago American newspaper in February 25th, 1936, I think it says. And it says 6 million people perish in Soviet famine, peasants' crops seized, they and their animals starve. Now, of course, our friend the New York Times, who is the most respected newspaper in the United States, what did they report? Well, they had their man in Moscow, his name is Walter Duranty. He reported, quote, "Here are the facts. There is no actual starvation or deaths from starvation, but there is widespread mortality from diseases due to malnutrition. These conditions are bad, but there is no famine." That's what he wrote and published. And he received a Pulitzer Prize for journalism for his lies. Okay. Now, the same year that he wrote this article, a few months later, he told an official in private at the British Embassy, he said privately that he knew that 10 million Russians and Ukrainians had died. He knew the truth. He knew the truth, but he lied. Now, why did he do that? Well, I've not spoken to him, so I can't be sure exactly what his motivation was, but he did receive a lot of gifts, a chauffeured car, and a mistress from the Soviet government, so he had a certain incentive to write what the Soviet government wanted. And this is actually a problem of journalists in many of these totalitarian countries. They know that if you write the truth, then you will be kicked out of the country. So there's an incentive to change what you report. Now, Mao, he really looked up to Stalin. You know, Stalin was a great Soviet communist leader, and Mao wanted to be even greater than Stalin. So he adopted Stalin's methods in China. He collectivized the farms in China in the late 1950s. And, you know, Mao, apparently he was a very good swimmer. He would go swimming in the Yangtze River and show how vigorous and strong he was. And they wrote that Mao wants even nature to bend to his will. I mean, this is so absurd that I don't even know what to say about it. But it's typical of the hubris of the communists who think they can abolish God, they think they can abolish eternal truths, and they think they can order nature around. Okay, it's really worship of man, basically, self-worship. And also, Mao noticed that the birds were eating up all the seeds. You know, so he ordered the Chinese people, particularly those who in the farm areas, you know, these birds are eating up all the seeds. So you need to kill these, especially, you know, the sparrows and all these birds. You need to kill them. So what they would do was they would be clanging pots and pans so that the birds are, after flying, they like to come down on the on the ground. And I guess that's where they're eating seeds and things like that. So all the peasants are clanging pots and pans so that the birds have to go back up in the air. And they kept on doing this. And apparently, in many cases, the birds were literally dropping from the air dead, okay, because they could not, you know, rest on the ground. Of course, they probably could have, I don't know, flown away, but maybe they're doing this all over China. And so many, many birds died because of this order from the top. So what do you think happened after you get rid of all the birds? What happens? Well, there are a lot of insects, okay? And those insects like to eat all the crops, basically. And there are no birds to keep the numbers of insects down. And so there's a huge famine in China because the insects are eating up basically all the crops. So peasants were ordered to eat tree bark, mud, and bird droppings. Now, I was trying to figure out, it didn't quite make sense. Why would anyone want to eat mud? I mean, I could not really understand that. But then I realized, maybe if you're so hungry and you just feel so empty inside, if you somehow are able to put mud down your throat, then at least you may feel full. You may feel full for a little while. But the trouble is, after the moisture is taken out of the mud, it becomes like concrete in your stomach. And you die a horrible, painful death because you've done this. 30 million people starved to death. But hey, who cares? You know, it's all for the revolution, right? It doesn't really matter. I mean, from the communist perspective, you're getting people, I mean, it's not necessarily a problem for them. And then about 10 years later, Mao, he realized that his reputation was kind of suffering, you know, because of these types of bad policies. So he saw, you know, people were, you know, within the Communist Party, the schools, and so on, some people were complaining. So to eliminate rivals within the Communist Party, schools, factories, government institutions, he said there are bourgeois elements that infiltrated the government and society with the aim of restoring capitalism. And so he launched in May 1966, he called on the young people to join the Red Guards and rebel groups. And he said, you have to remove these revisionists through violent class struggle. And so you have these groups of young people going around accusing their professors, accusing sometimes their own parents, accusing anybody who they think is educated and may be a bourgeois anti-revolutionary, and killing them, or sending them, taking them to go to a prison camp, re-education camp. So millions were killed during that time as well. Now here's somebody who actually did this when he was young. A woman was denounced by her son and husband for having criticized Chairman Mao Zedong. Less than 2 months later, she was executed. And this man, his name is Zhang, he was 16 years old at the time. He believed at the time that he was doing the right thing. He was the one who denounced his own mother, who was murdered by the government. But now he realized, of course, he feels what he did is haunting him. He says, I want to atone for my crimes. This is what communism does. It turns people in the family against each other. The children are said, you have to be loyal to the great leader, not to your own parents. That's what the communism is. So, if you look at many countries where communism took over, the result was mass murder. So, we have 67 million people were murdered in communist China, 70 million people in the Soviet Union, 3 million in Cambodia. You may know about Cambodia. Anybody who wore eyeglasses, they thought, oh, you must have education, you know how to read. Anybody who spoke another foreign language, they were taken and murdered, sometimes just beaten to death. 2 million in North Korea, 1.7 million in Ethiopia, 1.5 million in Afghanistan, 1 million in the Eastern Bloc, 1 million in Vietnam, 150,000 in Latin America. So I feel bad because these are just numbers. Okay, so, they say that one death is a tragedy, but many murders are just a statistic, right? So it's hard to really understand what this actually is. Now, when we look at Adolf Hitler, the Nazi party in Germany, they murdered 25 million victims. Or their actions led to 25 million deaths. And some people think that fascism and communism are opposites, but that is not true. They are they're evil twins, basically. They are twins, because both seek to use the state to seize and control wealth, and power. They are both socialists. Nazi means National Socialist. So the communists want worldwide socialism. The Nazis wanted socialism based on the nation. In Nazi Germany, on the Aryan race, right? The white race, right? So it was centered on their race, but they still wanted the same thing. They wanted the government to control the means of production. And if you look at Nazi Germany, there are certain very large corporations who are working like this with the government. We can see the same thing today in the United States. There are several large corporations that are very close to the leftists, to especially, the Democrat Party, the leftists, and they are censoring information that, just this past week with Hunter Biden, right? They found out that Hunter Biden was demanding $10 million from this leader of a Chinese company to meet his father. Totally corrupt. And the big media corporations are trying to hide this. Okay, it's the same thing. You have big government and big business working together. And that's really what the Democrat Party is about. Anyway, it's different from what they say. Okay, so you see here, these are Nazis, members of the Nazi Party. Basically, these are white people who want the government to help the white race, basically. They believe that to be an American, you're really not a true American unless you come from a European background. But, of course, we'll be talking more about this issue tomorrow or Monday when we'll discuss more. The founders did not think this way. The founders did not found America upon a race. It's based upon an idea. We'll talk about that. And here you see the Antifa, they say that they're anti-fascist. No, they are fascist. They are left-wing fascists. They use violence, intimidation to achieve their goals, just like the Nazis, just like the brown shirts in Nazi Germany. So I just want to take a step back and talk about Cain-type change versus Abel-type change. This is very important. So the left-wing thinking is that human beings are corrupted by society and by institutions, right? So the solution is to have a revolution and change the institutions. Then, and you remove the oppressive class, you get rid of them, you change who's running the institutions, and then you've solved the problem, right? So in their thinking, there are these bad guys who are the oppressors. We just have to kill them all, and then we've solved the problem, right? That's the way they think. That's the way Cain, you see the picture of Cain and Abel, right? Cain thought that his problem was Abel. God told Cain what? God told Cain, the problem is not Abel. The problem is inside you. You have this anger and hatred inside you and jealousy. You have to overcome this. But Cain was not able to understand. So the Cain-type leftist thinking is we get rid of those oppressive class, we kill them all, and then we re-educate everybody else to eradicate the anti-revolutionary beliefs. And we don't have to worry, it's okay to lie and kill because there's no God, there's no eternal life judgment. And, we can sacrifice a few million people for the greater good. They're more than willing to sacrifice huge numbers of people. It doesn't mean anything to them. It means nothing. That's Cain-type vision of building an ideal world. Now, we know that the able-type view is very different. So, in the able-type view, and essentially I'm talking about the biblical view, teaches that every human being, we all have the capacity for extreme good and extreme evil, right? And there have been experiments about this. At Yale University, there's the famous Milgram experiment, where they brought average citizens to the university, and someone in a white coat who, they said, this is Professor so-and-so, and we're doing this experiment, and we're going to put you in a room here, and there's going to be a glass wall, and there's somebody else on the other side of this glass wall. And when you push this button, there'll be electric shock will be given to the person in the other room. And now you have to do this. It's an experiment. That person it's a real electric shock, and so they found out that I believe it was about 75%, 3 in 4 people were willing to give electric shocks, even though the other person was actually an actor pretending to be, receiving the shock. But these people thought it was real. 3 out of 4 people gave the electric shock, even when they were told that you're reaching the level where it could cause death. The shock could cause death to that person. But the man in the white coat said, you have to do this. You have to do this. So human beings, I'm sorry to say this, but in the right context, you and I, on average, can do really evil things. And if you look at Nazi Germany, also Soviet Union as well, average people, average citizens, prison guards and so on, who love their family, love their wife, wanted to support their family. They were ordered to do certain things, and many of them did what they were told. Okay? That is the fearful thing that we have to realize. People think, well, I'm not sure about this, but they're telling me I have to do this. If I don't follow what they tell me to do, then I could lose my job, or I could be sent to the prison camp myself. Actually, if you're interested in this, you can read Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He's written about about these issues in his books. And, he was a loyal communist, and he was fighting against Germany during World War II. And then he wrote something in one letter that was a little bit critical of the communist government. And they found out, and then they sent him to the prison camp. And he spent many decades in the re-education in Siberia, in the Gulag. And he realized that he was complicit himself. He realized that, the Russian people, you see someone being arrested, and or even someone who lives in your apartment building, and you see that they're being arrested, and you know that that's not something right to do, but you say nothing. And you say nothing, and so he realized Communism exists not just because there are bad people on the top. It's because the people themselves became corrupted. They were afraid to do the right thing. They're afraid to say the truth. And, so it's not just Stalin's problem, do you see what my point is? Yeah. So that's the reality we all have, that we have this capacity to become corrupt. Now, on the other hand, it's also true that we also have the capacity for extreme goodness, right? You look at people, martyrs in human history, sometimes average people. I mean, look at the early Christians. I mean, anyway, this is a whole big topic. But basically, extreme good or evil, that's my point, okay? And so, since each one of us has sin, we have to fight against the corruption inside myself. That's the able view. We have a moral obligation for each of us this moral obligation to choose goodness. It becomes because there is a God, right? I mean, you might have an atheist who tries to do the right thing, who acts in a moral way, but his belief system does not require him. He believes there's no God. He believes there's just matter. So that belief system does not require you to be a good person, right? And of course, the act of murder is prohibited in the Bible. The Bible says in the Ten Commandments and throughout the Old Testament, God warns people against misusing violence. So when we use the rod of iron, we only use it to protect human life. We don't use it to impose our beliefs on anybody. We do not convert people with a gun, okay? Just want to make that very clear, right? It's to protect people, right? Okay. Because we believe that individual life has inherent value, all right? So even a communist, he may be deluded, he may be doing wrong things, but even the life of a communist has value. Of course, if they've done crimes, they should be prosecuted, right? So, okay. All right, so in the able type worldview, there are limits on centralized power. So in the Constitution of the United States, we have the Bill of Rights, and those same Bill of Rights are in the Chinagua Constitution. So I just want to mention quickly about 5 of these amendments. So number 1, we have freedom of religion, speech, and the press, right? So people have the right to believe what they want or even not to believe, right? Freedom of speech and the press, these are protected. Amendment number 2 is the right to bear arms, which is the right of kings, right? As a second king explained in his speech at the Freedom Festival, we have the right of kings to have self-defense and weapons. Amendment number 4, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, and which anyway I could say a lot, but we have a certain level of privacy, right, about what we say or our emails and so on. And amendment number 5, protection of rights to life, liberty, and property. So, and then it states in the Constitution of the United States and also Constitution of Chinagua, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. Okay? The government can't come and kill you. It can't put you in a prison. It can't take away your property without a trial. And you have the right to defend, a right to have a lawyer, to call witnesses, and defend yourself. That's the difference between a totalitarian state and God's ideal. And I just want to say I am so grateful to the second king for releasing this Constitution, because it makes things very clear. Very clear. We are not trying to create another tyranny, okay, with a certain belief system that we impose on people. That's not what we're trying to do. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Okay, so now I just want to play a short video that was made a few years ago.
In June of 1989, the Chinese Communist government declared war on its own citizens in what is known as the Tiananmen Square Massacre, which started on the night of June 3rd and carried on to June 4th. That night, the democracy movement brewing in China would be crushed by an unexpected, terrifying show of merciless force. Using tanks and machine guns, the Chinese authorities murdered and maimed tens of thousands of unarmed men, women, and children in Beijing, the capital of China. Almost every government has a history of murdering its own people. Within the 20th century alone, over 262 million people have been victims of democide. How quickly has humanity forgotten, and how easy it is to forget. The result of concentrated political power has been the oppression of millions of people, many of whom have become victims of democide, death by their own government. Their lives were cut unceremoniously short in order to satisfy the arbitrary wishes of their own governments, who were supposed to serve their people.
Through these fallen archangelic powers, Satan has used governments and centralized powers to keep humanity from discovering their identity in Christ and God. When humanity has tried to rebel against these forces, they have been brutally punished in the crucible of death, murder, torture, rape, and genocide by the very powers that claim to protect them. In the 20th century alone, over 262 million people have been killed by government. Countless millions have been killed by democide in the span of the history of fallen man. Democide being the killing and genocide of people by government. As a nation's political power becomes more unrestrained and centralized, the more it will murder its own citizens. The Chinese Communist Party has democided over 77 million people in the 20th century. The Soviet Union murdered over 62 million people under Stalin, and Nazi Germany killed over 12 million people under Hitler. Pol Pot mass murdered over 3 million in Cambodia. In the 20th century, over 6 times the killings of other human beings have come by the hands of government workers than by actual wars and on the battlefield. These innocent victims of archangelic power and genocidal, centralized government are forgotten and ignored by history and are grieving in the spirit world.
Okay, those are words of our second king. So just to conclude this presentation, I just want to summarize communist attack, first of all, on the first blessing, on our relationship with God. So therefore their hatred of religion. So we see 95,000 Orthodox priests were executed in the first 2 decades of the Soviet Union. Here you see the demolition of Christ the Savior Cathedral in Moscow in 1931. Here we see, actually, this is 2 years ago in communist China. They demolished a Christian megachurch in, I believe this was near Beijing. And they blew up this church. This is 2 years ago in China. There's a Chinese textbook that, this is an article that came out about 1 month ago. There's a Chinese communist textbook, and it says that Jesus stoned a woman to death. Okay. We all know what really happened, right? Jesus was defending the woman and saying, anyone who has no sin, you should stone her to death. And everyone walked away. But the communists, they're even lying about Jesus Christ. Okay. China is killing religious and ethnic minorities, harvesting their organs. A 2019 report from the China Tribunal, there's clear evidence China has been extracting organs from and thereby killing members of Falun Gong and other spiritual groups for 20 years. And the practice is continuing today. Detainees are killed to order, cut open while still alive for their kidneys, livers, hearts, lungs, cornea, and skin to be removed and turned into commodities for sale. That's what's happening today. Now, I want to show communism here in the United States.
Look at what they're doing. Why are you bringing a baby into a church that's wrapping off? You are pissing your This is no house of God. Good morning. Continue to teach. I'm calling EPS on you.
Okay, so look at what they're saying. Look at what they're saying. They're harassing these churchgoers in Troy, New York. This is less than 1 hour away from here, or roughly hour and a half from here in upstate New York. And they're harassing this woman bringing her children to church. There's actually an interracial church. I don't know if you noticed that. Okay. And they're harassing this woman for bringing her children to church. This is happening in America. Now, communism attacking second blessing as well. So Marx and Engels wrote, exploitation of man by man is present in embryonic form in the family relationship itself. Property, ownership of private property, which is a sin in communist thinking. The nucleus, the first form of which lies in the family, where wife and children are the slaves of the husband. Okay, so we mentioned that already. So, yeah, the bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. And then also, Engels wrote, with the transfer of the means of production into common ownership, the single family ceases to be the economic unit of society. Private housekeeping is transformed into a social industry. The care and education of the children becomes a public affair. Of course, the Democrat Party and leftists, they want the raising of children to take place at government daycare centers, right? Think about it. They want the same thing that Marx and Engels wanted. And then there's communism attack on the third blessing. So as we said, the abolition of private property is the complete emancipation of all human senses and qualities. Now, I was trying to understand this. how does abolishing private property emancipate human senses and qualities? I don't understand it. I don't understand the connection. The proletarian liberates himself by abolishing competition, private property, and all class differences. Okay. I'm not sure how that works. Yeah, so again, private property must be abolished, right? And then government, in its place must come common utilization of all instruments of production, distribution of all products according to the common agreement. In a word, what's called the communal ownership of goods. So I want to give you an example of this communal ownership. And so here we have an example when Stalin ordered the private farms to be taken away from their owners and communal farms to be created, right? So, so as we already discussed, millions died across the Soviet Union after government confiscated food and guns. The Foreign Press Corps helped cover up the catastrophe. Those are coffins, by the way, that you see there. All right, so, so in the years 1932 and 1933, a catastrophic famine swept across the Soviet Union. Okay, and despite the shortages that were created because of these communal farms, the state demanded not just grain, but all available food. At the height of the crisis, organized teams of policemen and local party activists, motivated by hunger, fear, and a decade of hateful propaganda, entered peasant households and took everything edible: potatoes, beets, squash, beans, peas, farm animals. At the same time, a cordon was drawn around the Ukrainian Republic to prevent escape. The result was a catastrophe. At least 5 million people perished of hunger. Among them were nearly 4 million Ukrainians who died not because of neglect or crop failure, but because they've been deliberately deprived of food. Okay, so that's what happened. Now, here in America, this is like 2 months ago, there was an article published on the National Public Radio website, and they reported this. There's a woman who wrote in defense of looting. Looting is when you steal someone else's private property. So this, in America, this is happening. So this is what this person wrote. Natalie Escobar, okay. Yeah. When I use the word looting, I mean the mass expropriation of property, mass shoplifting during a moment of upheaval or a riot. That's the thing that I'm defending. I'm not defending any situation in which property is stolen by force. It's not a home invasion either. It's about a certain kind of action that's taken during protests and riots. Rioting generally refers to any moment of mass unrest or upheaval. Riots are a space in which a mass of people has produced a situation in which the general laws that govern society no longer function. It means anarchy. And people can act in different ways in the street and in public. I'd say that rioting is a broader category in which looting appears as a tactic. Often looting is more common among movements that are coming from below. It tends to be an attack on a business, a commercial space, and maybe a government building, taking those things which would otherwise be commodified and controlled and sharing them for free. So you're actually doing a public service. When you go into a Target or a Walmart or someone's store and you liberate property that otherwise would be sold by an evil capitalist, you're doing something good. Only an intellectual could be this stupid. There's a level of stupidity which you need to have a PhD to achieve. Okay, now I've had some brothers who have a PhD who've written to me in private and saying, I'm not talking about all PhDs, okay? I just want to point this out. But everything I said is true. I have to, okay. So now the Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989. It was a very exciting time. I think many of us remember this. The Berlin Wall, which kept the East Germans prisoners in communist East Germany, and they had to risk their lives to escape. The Berlin Wall was destroyed. That was a wonderful time. And then we had the dissolution of the Soviet Union, December 25th, which is Christmas Day, 1991. The Soviet hammer and sickle flag was lowered for the last time over the Kremlin. And therefore, they replaced the communist flag with the Russian national flag, a tricolor flag. Earlier in the day, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned his post as president of the Soviet Union, leaving Boris Yeltsin as president of a newly independent Russian state. And President Ronald Reagan, who was hated by the leftist media, they called him a dangerous cowboy who would start World War III. But he went to Berlin in 1987 and gave a speech at the Berlin Wall, and he said, Premier Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Tear down this wall. And the leftists, they practically were peeing in their pants because he told the truth. And God worked through Reagan. And we all know that True Father mobilized the unification movement in 1980 to help Ronald Reagan be elected. That's what True Father did, to help Ronald Reagan be elected. And we all know that Father helped Richard Nixon too. He's trying to help him not be pushed out, because he knew if Richard Nixon was pushed out of his presidency, a lot of people would die in Southeast Asia, which happened, right? Unfortunately, Nixon was not able to stay in his position. And they're trying to do the same thing with Donald Trump today. The communists and leftists hate Trump because they know as long as he's president, he's going to stop or slow down what their evil plan. But that's not going to happen, because on November 3rd, Donald Trump will be reelected. Now, just a few years before the Soviet Union collapsed, a certain religious leader named Reverend Sun Myung Moon sponsored a conference. It's called the Second International Congress, The Fall of the Soviet Empire, Prospects for Transition to a Post-Soviet World. This is before the Soviet Union actually collapsed. And you can imagine the professors were shaking in their boots because nobody thought that this was going to happen. But Father was making a proclamation. You know, many times Father would say things, and I would say, Father, I understand. I think I understand what you're saying, but when I look at the reality, I don't see what you're talking about, because communism looks so powerful, right? But Father was making a proclamation through this conference, Professors World Peace Academy. So they predicted the downfall of this. Dr. Morton Kaplan from University of Chicago. The wonderful thing is he was a respected historian, but he united with True Father. He said, okay, Reverend Moon, you want that to be the title? I'm going to unite with you, and we're going to have this conference. And then on April 10th, 11th through 1990, True Father spoke in Moscow at the World Media Conference, and he met with the Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev. And Father said, "You're undertaking a new Soviet revolution, but this should be a revolution of the heart and soul." So the Soviets invited him, allowed him to hold this conference, because they knew that Father hated communism, but he did not hate the Soviet people. He was trying to save them. And that is a wonderful, true Father that we have. He sacrificed the Unification Church to save the Russian people and many, many other people all over the world. And his son is doing the same thing right now. Okay? And the Family Federation that has billions of dollars is not lifting a finger. My understanding is that Haq Jahan said, "You can vote for whomever you want." Can you imagine her saying that? You can vote for, whoever, whoever you're, anyway, don't get me started. Okay. So after the Soviet Union fell and we thought communism was completely destroyed, then there was world peace and harmony, right? Maybe that's what we thought, but no, I'm sorry. And answer is no, it didn't happen that way. So, okay, we have to finish right here. Okay, it's 7:30. I don't want to go too long, but thank you for. Thank you.